Hello and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to speak with everyday superheroes helping nonprofits. Joining me today is Sarah Hoshooley to talk about Connect for Good. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Hi, Alex. Thanks for having me.
So my favorite question to start the episode is, what is your superhero origin story? That is to say, how did you get started working with nonprofits in the first place?
Such a great question. And I think probably like a lot of us working in nonprofits, or a lot of us working in fundraising, I should say, is I kind of found it by accident. 2008, I was working in the financial industry doing recruitment, and found myself without a job, as a lot of people in the finance industry did at that time. And I was really lucky. I found a volunteer program in Belize, which is located in Central America. And they were looking for people to help them with recruitment of volunteers from around the world, which I thought was a very interesting challenge. So went down to Belize for 4 months. That was my first time really working within a nonprofit. And recruiting volunteers from around the world, it was so much fun. And partway through my time there, their truck broke down, which is how they delivered services to people within the community. And essentially, it was kind of like a make or break it moment. If they didn't raise enough money to get this truck repaired, essentially people in the community were going to be without food, without services. And so we were doing fundraising campaigns and just doing little grassroots fundraising events here and there. And then all of a sudden I thought, well, I'm talking to people from all around the world who, for them, $20 is probably not a big deal. And our fundraising campaign was $1,000, which was a lot for that community. And so I thought, well, as I'm reaching out to all these volunteers from around the world, I'm going to also put together a crowdfunding campaign, which was pretty new at that time, and ask people to just say like, hey, here's the situation. Can you pitch in a couple dollars? And so we raised over $2,000, which was amazing. And then I thought, this is really fun, and I think I'm kind of good at it. And so I came back to Canada a couple months later. And from there, that's kind of how I started in nonprofits, specifically within fundraising. So that's my origin story, I guess, of working in nonprofits and really being in love with fundraising.
That is an awesome story.
Thanks.
Great way to start. And awesome to hear that you're a fellow Canadian. Not too many of us on the podcast.
That's right.
So I know you have your own consulting firm, but the focus of today's conversation is more your, I don't know if it's a passion project at the moment or your secondary project. I'm not sure what kind of category you put it into, but it's something called Connect for Good. And maybe you could just explain, what was your idea behind it? What motivated you to start this Connect for Good platform?
Yeah. So I'll back up a little bit and just talk about kind of what I've been up to for the last couple of years, which has really led to Connect for Good being launched.
Sure.
And that is, so I've worked for a number of years, I worked for very large nonprofit organizations within Canada. I was an executive director at a small nonprofit. And then about 4 years ago, I started doing fundraising consulting. And what I've realized throughout my time in the Canadian nonprofit sector specifically is that there's so much great information and content and resources available. However, it's very difficult to find. And I found that when I worked in the larger organizations, we had connections with different people in the community. We had no shortage of resources to find information, or, we'd have additional budget to do the things that needed to be done. But in the small nonprofits, which is the majority of Canadian nonprofits, and specifically small $2 million and under, some of them are volunteer only. Many of them are passion projects that have just grown and grown over the years, really limited for resources, and really looking for information that, as I said, is sometimes difficult to find. So that's on the nonprofit side. On the other side, as I've been doing fundraising consulting the last 4 years, I meet people every day, people like yourself, Alex, who are doing incredible things for the nonprofit sector through nonprofit serving businesses. And a lot of times I meet with these businesses and they don't know how to reach their target audience. And so I realized on the nonprofit side, we're looking for information, we're trying to find the resources. On the nonprofit business side, we're trying to connect with nonprofits. And on both sides, there's this lack of connection point. And so over the last couple of years, I've had this idea and I thought I'm just going to launch it. And it's really had some great response and people are pretty excited about it. So it's called Connect for Good and it's built for Canadian nonprofits and the nonprofit businesses who serve them. So essentially, it's a one-stop shop for Canadian nonprofits to access resources, information, and like I said, the nonprofit serving businesses that help them thrive. So right now, it is an online community. We've had one in-person launch event that was in Vancouver in November, and we'll be launching more in different cities across Canada throughout 2024.
Why do you think it's so difficult to find Canadian specific resources? Because I agree, it is very challenging, and most of it tends to be at least focused on the US. Is it just because there's just enough people who are generating content that can be found, or is it just things are hidden everywhere in pockets and it's you're able to find them? Like, I'm just curious to know, why is it so challenging?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think a lot of different things. There's some things that just aren't available or just don't work in Canada. And I also think it's important to identify the US, UK, Europe. All of these markets are different. The way that we do things in Canada are, the way that we register, legal, HR, our charitable status, our tax receipting. There's so many things that within Canada are very, very unique. And I will also say that the Canadian nonprofit sector is less than 10% the size of the US market. And so because of that, of course, nonprofit serving businesses are really going to be looking at the US in most cases. And what I found is that some US based businesses, a lot of them have not necessarily served the Canadian nonprofit sector, and they don't realize the nuances that are quite different and quite important. And I'll also say as well, I've done a little bit of work in the UK and in Europe. Number one, in the UK and Europe, tax receipting is not a thing like what we have in Canada and the US. So motivations to give are quite a bit different. As well, just as an example, in the UK, monthly giving is so prevalent. It's actually called regular giving, and it's the default way that donors give. Whereas in Canada, it's kind of a newer concept for organizations, especially for smaller ones. And I'll also say that I think that there's a lot of incredible small nonprofit serving businesses like yours, like mine, where it's Canadian focused. We're specifically for the Canadian market, or we specifically understand the Canadian market, and we just don't have the same budgets or the same reach as some of the larger organizations, especially organizations that are just run by one person or by a very small team. And so we kind of get a little bit pushed out by the larger players within the market and within our sector. So part of it for me as well is to really highlight the incredible nonprofit serving businesses that may not be the household names that we're all familiar with yet.
I'm a little familiar with the UK in the sense that I know that the tax receipting is different, partly because of my app that I'm working on for Salesforce nonprofits. Mm-hmm. But I didn't know it was called regular giving in the UK for monthly giving. That's pretty cool. And I wish we could adopt that perspective in North America as well, that this should be, or could be, or might be one day the default approach is giving monthly. That would be a wonderful thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, okay, 10% of the US, I mean, that's a huge number in the small sense. Like, that's a tiny number is what I mean. And I'm curious to know, because for Canada, yes, obviously there are nuances. Is language one of them? Obviously, there are certain parts of Canada that are French, and sometimes even just finding French-specific resources, for Quebec and for Nova Scotia becomes challenging. Is that part of the nuance, or do those areas tend to also fall into the regular Canadian type of resources?
Yeah, great question. So I will say I worked for two large national organizations as well as consulted with large national organizations in Canada. And it is a requirement of a national organization to have all of their content available in both English and French. And of course, for US based businesses or businesses based elsewhere, that's not something that they even really consider. Or if they are considering it, it is a very intentional piece of their business that they are taking on because it's complicated. Some of the content, I mean, essentially has to be duplicated. I do know of one CRM system that's based in the US that's looking to expand across Canada. And they haven't quite had the expansion that they wanted yet because they're working on making sure that everything is fully translated, which does take time. And that is very unique and specific within Canada.
I want to correct myself as well. I said Nova Scotia, but I meant New Brunswick. That's the second province that
Right.
is mostly French. Sorry about that. Yeah, and that's definitely a challenge. I've noticed that some Canadians, unfortunately, or at least some consulting services helping Canadians omit the French part. I know it's a smaller subsegment of the entire market, but to me, it's still an important one, of course, by being from Montreal. So I think a language is a nuance, but it's a delicate one. And it's one that I'm happy that people and agencies who are aware of the Canadian market are aware of the language and are working around it, working with it, so that is a more inclusive type of approach.
Mhm. And I'd add to that as well. I think what's somewhat unique about Canada is that geographically and even culturally, in some instances, is that from coast to coast, we are very, very similar in terms of the ways in which we do things. And I say that in comparison with the US, where even from state to state in the US, the ways that things are done, the legislation, the restrictions are very, very different from state to state. Whereas in Canada, we have some differences province to province, but for the most part, a nonprofit in BC versus Yukon versus Ontario versus Newfoundland, they're all going to operate and follow relatively similar rules. And that I think allows us to although we are, smaller in terms of numbers, we are the same across the country.
So just to go on a small tangent here to digress, I once did a trip from Vancouver, which is on the west coast, all the way to St. John's, which is on the east coast, so end to end. And it was really cute because I noticed that all of us, of course, were typically known as Canadians to use the word "a," but it was really lovely to actually hear it as I was traveling from coast to coast. And I thought that was a unifying expression that really connects all of us despite, the distances, because that's a huge, I don't know how many kilometers or miles between those two cities. We're talking about thousands of something. And yet we're unified by that one single word. To me, there was something very grounding and wholesome about it.
I love that. I love that. I live in Toronto right now. I grew up in Ontario and lived in Vancouver for 15 years and just moved back to Ontario. I'm living in Toronto now as of a year and a half ago. And it is interesting to see the similarities and the differences. I will say living in BC, there's definitely certain words and expressions that are West Coast versus East Coast and certainly some of the prairies in the East Coast as well have a little bit different language, but I like that. I like that, Alexander, that you're talking about that everybody says "a." Although we use the word "a" in a very different way than other countries think we do.
Shh, don't tell them. Okay. So the platform Connect for Good, it's a library of resources. You said it's also a community. You had one in person, more to follow. I also believe I do know, there's also a newsletter that you have as well that shares this information. Can you talk more about the newsletter in part?
Yeah, so it's a weekly newsletter that really highlights some of the new resources. With Connect for Good, it is a searchable online database. So, for example, if somebody was looking for something that has to do with fundraising, they could type in their search into the search field of what it is that they're looking for, and a number of resources would pop up related to fundraising, and then they can click on each to learn more, as well as click within the pop-up to go directly to that item. So that's kind of how the website functions. In addition, so the weekly newsletter, it highlights the new resources that we have. Part of Connect for Good is making sure that we're always responsive to and hopefully proactive with the content that nonprofits are looking to find. I think a good example, today's February 1st that we're recording this, and as lots of people know, as of today, there have been quite a number of changes when it comes to the ways in which emails are being delivered. So that's something that I know a lot of nonprofits have been talking about over the last couple of weeks. So using that as an example, that's something that would be in a weekly newsletter. Just knowing that it's something that might be on the minds of nonprofits, and making sure that they have access to that information. As well, we always share a link to provide your own suggested resources. So if you are finding something that was really helpful for your own nonprofit, or you're a nonprofit serving business that recently learned about a resource or business or something that you think would be helpful for the Canadian nonprofit sector, there's an opportunity to share that. And then finally, beginning in March, every Wednesday, 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific, we're going to be doing an Ask Me Anything session. And essentially what that is, it is taking our typical webinars and flipping it upside down. It'll be a very brief but informative presentation from a nonprofit expert or nonprofit serving business. And then the rest of the hour is for nonprofits to ask their questions. So for example, if it is somebody who's talking about building relationships with Canadian government funders, for example, somebody would talk for a couple of minutes about what that looks like. And then you've essentially got 45 minutes to ask that person any question that you might have. All of the sessions will be recorded and will be available live on the website, so that people who aren't able to attend can still benefit from it.
And access to these sessions, to the newsletter, to the resources, is there a subscription model or a payment model involved, or is it just free?
Yeah, great question. And I should have mentioned that at the intro. So Connect for Good will always be 100% free for nonprofits, and there's no membership requirement or sign up involved. The reason for that is I don't believe in gatekeeping. I don't believe in having things behind paywalls or sign-up sheets or anything like that. I want this information to be free for anybody who needs it. So Connect for Good, you will be able to access all of the content. Of course, would love for everybody to sign up to the newsletter so that you are getting up-to-date information. But in terms of accessing the content, it will always be free for Canadian nonprofits, so that they can access the information that they need.
Yeah, I'm a subscriber myself of the newsletter, so I find it's useful, to your point, of having a curated amount of knowledge weekly by weekly whenever the newsletter is released, but it's very specific to Canadian nonprofits, which is harder to find these days. So I do appreciate the fact that you do this work. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for that.
I'm curious to know that when we were initially talking and you started telling me about what the platform does, I thought of a similar one, a competitor, which I think is fairly well known, called TechSoup. And I'm just curious to know, aside from, of course, being very focused on the Canadian market, what would be what is the differentiators between TechSoup and Connect for Good?
Yeah, great question. So TechSoup is similar in theory. So for those that haven't heard of it, it is a website. They're actually based in dozens of countries. And each country, I believe, has its own kind of unique website and curated content. And so it is specifically for nonprofits, donations and discounts for nonprofits. So TechSoup.ca is where you can go to find those for Canadian nonprofits. And so what they're doing is they're providing information specific to tech that nonprofits can access. So in theory, it's similar, but TechSoup is specifically for tech-related products only, whereas Connect for Good, yes, it includes tech, and we are featuring TechSoup on Connect for Good, but it covers anything that a nonprofit might be looking for. So things like fundraising, legal, HR, communications, marketing, references, information for boards. So it's really aiming to cover any sort of topic that could be beneficial for a Canadian nonprofit.
So I'm curious then, in the short term, besides you mentioned the upcoming sessions in March and onward, what future plans, or what short-term future plans I should specify, do you have for Connect for Good?
Yeah, I mean, it's really just about building the number of people who know about Connect for Good, as well as building the number of nonprofit serving businesses that are that want to feature their services on Connect for Good. As I mentioned, it is free for all Canadian nonprofits, and right now it is free for nonprofit serving businesses to be featured on Connect for Good. But that model will be changing in probably the next couple of months, where we'll have different content that will be sponsored by nonprofits serving businesses. And that's really just to help generate some revenue, to make sure that the website can continue, and that we can continue to bring good content. So it's really all about making sure that everyone who needs to know about Connect for Good does know about it. And so, yeah, like I said, we'll have the Ask Me Anything sessions beginning in March. We've got a new website that'll be launching in March as well. And then a new couple of city launches, one happening, I think I'm allowed to say the next city launch will be in Toronto, summer 2024, in partnership with a local conference that I'm really excited to partner with. More details on that coming soon, but really helping to make sure that all Canadian nonprofits at least know about Connect for Good, and that nonprofit serving businesses who support Canadian nonprofits know about it as an opportunity to highlight their business and to share the resources that they have.
I was hoping you could indulge me, go behind the curtain for a little bit, because as myself, as a person who has multiple interests, I have my consulting business, I got the app, I got the newsletter, I've got the podcast. It's a challenge sometimes to keep everything, keep all those balls in the air, juggling, so to speak. And I'm curious because, of course, you do have your fundraising consulting agency, and now this. How do you balance your time between the two? Like, is there, do you find delegating helps? Do you find that just leveraging certain technologies help? Outsourcing? I'm just curious to know, from as a business owner, how do you manage to do all of it?
Yeah, great question. And I think, to be fully transparent, Connect for Good, I had intended to launch this last November. It's now February. And so I would say having the two businesses, so Charity Shift, which does fundraising consulting for small Canadian nonprofits, and then, of course, Connect for Good, having both of them means that I can't necessarily go as far or as fast with either. Which is okay. I will say with my fundraising consulting company, which I've been running since for almost 4 years now, I've really streamlined what I offer in my fundraising consulting. So I used to do quite a few different things with Canadian nonprofit fundraising. And now I just offer two services. One of them, which is my main service, is helping Canadian nonprofits create a fundraising plan, and then helping them with implementing that plan and coaching them to success, as well as doing some coaching as well, just on very specific projects within Canadian nonprofits. So really streamlined the fundraising consulting that I'm doing to just those two very specific offerings. And then with Connect for Good, I do have a web developer that I've hired. I have a communications expert who's helping me with my newsletter, my marketing. I've hired a brand consultant who happens to be my partner, who's very talented, and he's helping me with graphic design and really making sure that it looks the way that I want to look. So with Connect for Good, recognizing I can't do everything all myself with that. So bringing in some experts for that. But I think it's really just being able to focus my energy. I'll be honest, I love fundraising consulting and I love bringing people together. And part of Connect for Good is, I know we were talking before about like superhero origin story, and I was thinking about superpowers. And I think one of the things that I do really well and that I love doing is connecting people and ideas and resources. And Connect for Good is something that, even when I should be relaxing or I shouldn't be thinking about work, I'm thinking about all the different pieces that can come together, all the little nuances, thinking about what are the things that would be most valuable for the nonprofits that are connected to Connect for Good. How can I bring it to more people? And so it's really a passion project for me, but it's also, I think, something that, if I think quite big about it and what the vision is I really want to save time, resources, and money that nonprofits are spending, because I want them to just get the information that they need, get the connections that they need, get the content that they need, and continue doing the great work that they're doing. So I want to be able to provide that resource for them. And it's that vision that really helps propel me forward, especially on those days where I'm doing, client work for fundraising consulting and then spending the evenings and into the night working on Connect for Good. So it's definitely a balancing act, but I love the work that I do. So I really can't complain.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate the transparency and honesty. That's actually strikingly familiar to what I do as well, where it's burning the midnight oil, but you do it out of love and you do it because it's a passion and a mission that's bigger than yourself. So, and it's lovely to have people that support you. Of course, outsourcing is a wonderful way to gain progress quickly, and cheap labor, like partners, always help too.
Yes.
So because I'm a tech geek, I love asking the question. And again, as a business owner as well, what kind of tech do you use? Like, do you have any CRMs, mass emailers, automation tools? How do you do the most with the time that you have?
Okay, so here's my honest answer to that question. I am not a tech person at all. I definitely rely on others who have, stronger skill sets in those areas. I will say I use ConvertKit to grow my email list, to send out my weekly emails. I did build my original Connect for Good website. For those of you that have been following Connect for Good for a while, you'll definitely note that the original website was pretty basic, and I just built that myself using Squarespace. I use Asana for task management, and I use Canva for some of the basic kind of graphic and document creation. But beyond that, my tech is pretty minimal. That's why, I've got a web developer who's creating something brand new. I've got my email and marketing support helping, and also graphic design and branding content. So the tech pieces, I'll be honest, I really outsource because that is not my area of expertise at all.
That's another great answer. Thank you for that. So how can people who are listening either register, get informed? I guess there's no really registration, but how can they get informed, sign up, subscribe to the newsletter, get more information about you and about Connect for Good?
Yeah, so it's connectforgood.ca. Connectforgood.ca is the website. You can go on there, you can take a look at the resources, you can suggest some resources, whether, I've had nonprofit serving businesses recommend themselves, which is perfectly welcome. I've had nonprofits say, I really want to learn more information about where to find grants, or I need support in figuring out which, tech pieces I should be using with my organization. So I really love to hear from people of what's valuable for them. So you'll see two different surveys and very brief questionnaires that are listed on Connect for Good. You can also sign up for our weekly Ask Me Anything series, which is beginning March 1st. And those are weekly, hosted on Zoom, very informal, but it does give you 1 hour's access to all sorts of different nonprofit serving experts. Each week will be a little bit different in terms of the topic, and you'll hear about that in advance so that you can prepare your questions. So connectforgood.ca, have a look around, let me know your thoughts, and please sign up for the weekly email as well.
Sarah, thank you so much for the work that you do. This is really meaningful to Canadian nonprofits and for businesses serving nonprofits. So thank you.
Great. Thanks so much for having me and for letting me tell more people about Connect for Good.
All right, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again in the next Agents of Nonprofit.